Why did it not work for Conte with Tottenham?
Not much went right, really, did it, for Conte at Spurs? And I think that Spurs are going for the quick fix. They've done it with Mourinho, they've done it now with Conte. They're both similar types of managers. They come into a club, they got one way to do it. It's their way or the highway, regardless of what players they've got, what style of players they have. And it's amazing. I can't believe that we're saying this about top level managers who don't have a plan B. It's just that one way. Well, I think that's what went wrong. Conte comes in. He brings in, first of all, the style doesn't suit Spurs traditionally. It's sort of sit back, catch them on the break, fast break, which looks great. And Spurs have got a handful of players who can handle that, but they don't have the defense to soak up wave after wave of pressure from the other club, from the other team, just waiting for that opportunity. So it didn't have the players. It wasn't successful. The Spurs crowd, the Spurs people like yourself, I imagine, didn't like the style, and so it never really worked. Mourinho was close to winning a trophy, then he got the bullet, and it's not been a disaster for Spurs. I always say this: Spurs always look so close to being so successful because they've got it all there. They've got a handful of fantastic players. They've got that fantastic stadium. But it's just not worked, and he's just so stubborn, and he's blamed everybody else. He's blamed everybody but himself, taking no responsibility for it. And it's down to him. Let's be honest. I mean, it was his job to form the team, to form how they play, to set the team out, and it's not worked for him.
Yeah. Look, I think when they brought Conte in, because every Spurs fan has had those supporters had the same beef with Levy over the years. He's not going to spend. He's not going to spend. He's not going to spend. They brought Conte in, and I think we thought, okay, they're finally going to spend. And they did, but they did it incrementally. They didn't make the big splash that needed to happen to be able to fill the roster completely out. So you bring in Conte. He likes to run wingbacks. You don't go get him wingbacks until the second season at the January windows when you finally go get him wingbacks. And when they brought guys in, they brought them in. They didn't go get the center back that he wanted, and they need center backs in a bad way. And they brought in young guys on the cheap that are in their early 20s instead of bringing in 26, 27, 28-year-olds in their prime that you expect to win today. Conte expected them to do that. Mourinho expected them to do that. So they're trying to build the way Arsenal's trying to build. And Levy and I think the front office is and the board is. And then you have managers on the sideline that are expecting you to spend like Chelsea and City and Liverpool do. And Spurs just weren't willing to do that. So what you got was a marriage of the two that just didn't work. So you ended up with some type of mutation of partly let's spend money and let's bring in a attacking midfielder. Let's bring in a couple of wingbacks late. Let's bring in a wingback on the cheap. Things like that they tried to do that they never really chose one way or the other. I think that you can skin that cat multiple ways. You can win multiple ways in the Premier League. At some point in time, you are going to have to spend and add to your team. And there's just a certain level that Spurs ownership and the board was never willing to do. Levy was never willing to spend money like Liverpool spends money, like City spends money, like United spends money, like Chelsea spends money. He was just never willing to do that. And so it works if you look. It's great if you've got Arsenal and your best players, Bukayo Saka, and he's incredibly young, and so you can not pay him a lot. Harry Kane's at the back end of things, and so you're paying him a lot. You're paying Son a lot, and then you're surrounding him to keep that payroll low with a bunch of guys that just frankly aren't good enough to be in a Big Six club. And that's a little bit of what they did. They did bring in guys. You make a good point, Chris, about it not, everything just kind of went poorly for them because they dealt with a ton of injuries over the last year, over Conte's tenure with Spurs. But Conte also, when his team was healthy, look, some of the losses, the Villa losses on Conte that they had in January. I mean, that's absolutely on him. You can tell they didn't care where they're passing the ball. I have no idea. The Leicester City loss in February was the same thing. Just slinging the ball all over the place. My niece's ASO team, we would yell out if they were to try to play like that. So there wasn't a lot of intention to what they were trying to do with the ball. On the offensive side. And part of that may be that he didn't have the wingbacks that he wanted to be able to create the way that he likes to create. He was unwilling to change. He had players playing out of position. They did eventually go spend for him. They just did it over a 1.5-year period. And Conte wasn't a guy that seemed like he was willing to be patient and let them spend over a 1.5-year period or let them bring in 22-year-olds, and then by the time they're 24, these are going to be world-class players, or they have a chance to be if you develop them right. That's not what Conte was looking for. He wanted to win today, to win immediately. And what's interesting is if you look at the issue with Inter, he left Inter on mutual terms as well for kind of the same thing. He ripped the club publicly for not spending and not bringing in the type of players that he wanted. And I think that guys like Conte, guys like Mourinho, they're used to you going and dropping a ton of money to bring in the guys that they need so that they can have the most talent and they can win today and they can manage those personalities in the locker room. And that's how we'll win, as opposed to winning the way Arteta's winning right now with young guys that I've developed and they're going to hit their peak and we're going to be fantastic and world beaters. And maybe we can hold off a City team that spends more than double what we do. You tried to marry it. You ended up with a mutation. It didn't work. Conte burned the thing down last Sunday after the draw with Southampton. Look, he did not do a good job, but everything he said about Levy and the Spurs board was absolutely true. And a lot of what he said about the players is absolutely true as well.
You're right there. It is true. It is to a degree. It's true, and there are so many factors at play, aren't there? I mean, you mentioned the style of play and the way they played, who they bought, when they bought, because they did spend money, but it was over time, and it was a bit of a scattergun approach to who they were buying, and they weren't really. It wasn't the same. They didn't buy like Brighton buy. Or Bournemouth buy, and you can see, there's a bit of thought. It doesn't look like there's a bit of any thought gone into who they've bought or what position they've bought, and they just sort of tried to plunge them into the team, and it didn't fit a system. And the way they played, there was no real identity. The way they played, one week it looked great, next week it looked like you say, looked like they couldn't string three passes together. So there was no identity there. So nothing ever gelled at all. But there was enough spent on the team so Levy could go, well, I spent money, and then Conte can still say, well, I didn't get the players I wanted because they weren't the superstars that Conte wants. He wants them immediately, and he wants the best players just to go out and win straight away. So it was never going to be a rebuilding job, this. And it seems like that you wonder what the conversation was like at the interview stage when Conte was recruited, because the marriage just never happened.
Okay, so I've seen a lot of people say Conte knew what he was getting into when he took Spurs' job. I will tell you this: Spurs fans, Spurs supporters thought that we're finally going to spend if you're bringing in Conte, which is true. Do you think that Spurs fans were just probably, I don't know, like a little too optimistic that the board was going to spend? Or are you kind of like a lot of the other people have written about this who say Conte had to know what he was getting into? Mourinho knew what he was getting into when he went to work for Daniel Levy.
Well, you'd think both sides would know what they were getting into, wouldn't you? And that's what I mean. What happened at the I won't call it an interview, but the talks between the two of them? Conte would obviously say what he wants. Levy would, you'd think, and he did. He delivered on money. But who was doing the recruiting? Either recruiting that was wrong, because there was a decent amount of money spent. It wasn't all immediate like Conte would have probably wanted. So it's hard to know. It's hard to tell. And as Spurs fans, you would think that all those boxes would be checked before anyone shook hands and signed a deal. But it doesn't. It seems like the deal was signed, and then the two parties went different ways, and everyone's surprised it doesn't work. It was a weird one.
Okay, so where does Spurs go from here? If you're, in your opinion, who are the top candidates? Who should they go after? Who will they land?
Well, I think I'm surprised they haven't already got Nagelsmann sorted out from Bayern Munich. He's just lost his job there. Fantastic young manager. Just because young doesn't make him fantastic, but he's a developmental coach. He can be part of a project. He's done great. He's done a great job with where he's been. Bayern Munich still in there. It's a strange one that he got fired, to be honest with you, because he's what is he, a point off? He's in second place in the Bundesliga, or he was with Bayern Munich, point off, top place, still in the Champions League. He gets fired. He is adaptable. He's what Conte isn't. He likes to play a number of different ways. He plays whatever suits the players that he's got, so which would be common sense, quite honestly, wouldn't it? But hey, so much for common sense. But yeah, for me, he would be the guy, and I'm surprised they haven't snapped him up already.
Yeah, it looks like there are beliefs that they're going to wait till summer. I think you may end up waiting too long, and Nagelsmann takes another job. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Nagelsmann or Nagelman that gets that job. I have a concern. Listen to a couple podcasts from guys who cover Bayern, and I guess there were stretches where it was very similar to Conte, where wow, you look fantastic, and then you just had stretches where are you passing the ball? What are you trying to do offensively? And that was a little bit problematic. But the one thing that he brings to the table that Mourinho didn't and Conte didn't is when you lose the ball with Nagelman, you try to get it back immediately. Like, right, you're going to press high, and that's something that Spurs just need to do. They have to do that. You have your best players are built for that. That's how they came up playing under Pochettino. That's the other guy that a lot of people are pointing to as saying, okay, what about Pochettino? And do you think that Pochettino could be an option for Levy this summer, and maybe we get the band back together, minus Christian Eriksen?
He could be. I think Pochettino, if he could have that final again, that Champions League final again, he'd do it differently. And I think that was he played that wrong, and then the wheels sort of came off. He could be. I'm never usually one for going back. I think I'd probably steer clear, to be honest with you. He wouldn't be a bad bet. He'd be probably a second bet because he does know the club. But Nagelman, he does, like as you say, he plays good attacking soccer, high press, win the ball back. That's where Spurs' strength is, in that top third of the field, in that attacking third of the field. Pochettino, I mean, he wouldn't be a disaster. Whether he'd want to come back, I don't know. And I think he'd be welcomed back by the Spurs fans. So, yeah, it could work out. It wouldn't be a bad second option.
What you said about Nagelman's true. It's why I think he's going to be the guy. I think they sell Harry Kane this summer and bring in young players. And you're right, he's a developmental coach. And because of that, and the style of play that fans want to see, I think that it just works out too much. My only concern is that Levy and the board are going to drag their feet, and you end up losing him to somewhere else because he says, maybe I don't want to go to Spurs when I have other options, because we all know they are not going to. At this point, we know without question, as long as Daniel Levy draws breath on planet Earth, Spurs are not going to spend like a big club. They're not going to. And so Nagelman seems like the right guy for it, but if he gets an opportunity to go somewhere where they will spend, does he take that one? Apparently the knock on him is that he struggles to deal with the big personalities and to manage a lot of big personalities in one changing room. So maybe Spurs being young and he's better at developmental than he is dealing with big personalities, maybe it's a perfect match.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be too much trouble in that changing room, does there? You know, Kane seems to go with the flow. I'm sure he's no shrinking violet, but he does, he never causes any hassle. Son, the same. The big personalities. Richarlison is one you could see having his say in there. He hasn't really worked out either as yet. Maybe a new coach will turn him around. So yeah, I wouldn't think that would be too much of an issue. I don't think there's the big superstars like Ten Hag walked into Manchester United and had to sort out. So no, I think he could go straight into there and start working with them.